Welcome to Study Loop.
For this question, we're looking at radiometric, anatomic, and molecular evidence for evolution. So radiometric is going to refer to the measurement typically of some sort of radiation coming off of something. This could be the conversion of, say, C13 to C12, or it could be through the conversion of uranium or other like molecules that are going to break down through some sort of nuclear decay. What this is useful for is it's going to allow us to date objects, specifically fossils and rocks, and even certain anatomical structures such as skulls we may find. So by being able to date these fossils and anatomical structures that we find during archaeology, we're able to sort of create a timeline or a link to see the development of different organisms over time. So for example, we have dug up different sets of animal skulls and human skulls. And actually, if you look into it, there was a famous human skull called Lucy, which shows some prehistoric characteristics of what we imagine to be a human skull. And of course, we can compare that to the skulls that we have now and see some differences, see some changes, and link this to the evolution or gradual change of humans to adapt to their environment. This, of course, applies to different fossils, such as dinosaurs, seeing how they have adapted and mutated and evolved through the ages to give us the different species we have today. For anatomic evidence for evolution, we're going to mostly look at embryology as well as homologous and vestigial structures. So starting with homologous and vestigial structures, these are going to be similar structures found between organisms. Homologous structures would be similar structures that we see in organisms that have sort of a same function between one another, kind of located in the same place. So one of the best examples are some of the bones in, say, an appendage, such as in the human, you have the radius. You'll see these similar kind of bone structures in different organisms, such as, say, the legs and arms or appendages of a horse, of a whale, and different organisms. And they're going to share that same kind of bony structure. And that kind of points to the fact that we're all going to differentiate based on different qualities, but there is some linking ancestor involved. In the same way, vestigial structures are organs or systems that we find similar between organisms, but in some organisms, these are no longer useful. So for example, the appendix is a good example of this. In humans, the appendix is not necessary for survival, and some of its functions are pretty unknown. However, it's linked to, say, a water-breathing organ seen in some prehistoric fossils in some organisms. So that links, again, to similar qualities being developed or being eliminated from organisms over time as they change and evolve. Embryology is important to anatomical evidence because we share some very significant qualities between different organisms. So some organisms will develop from an egg, and of course some will give live birth. However, some qualities of the embryo itself, as it develops into the fetus share some similar qualities, such as some of the structuring where they have sort of a head-like organ, as well as a tail-like appendage as they begin to start forming. And of course, they're going to share similar qualities of differentiation and growth, such as the formation of a notochord, which is going to give rise to the nervous system of the organism, and certain qualities such as the yolk, which even the yolk is found inside human embryos as they begin to form, but is only lost later in development of the fetus. So these similar qualities to the origin or birth of organisms shows again that linkage to a common ancestor from which these qualities first derived from. Lastly, moving on to some of the molecular evidence, this is referring to the shared commonality of all living organisms using DNA. So this is the similarity between bacteria, plants, as well as many different other types of animals. So the fact that all organisms are going to have to rely on DNA itself as its genetic basis proves that, again, we all have some sort of common ancestor, and that evolution gave rise to different qualities, whereas certain qualities, such as the reliance on DNA, are preserved. We can also look at other factors of the DNA, such as certain preserved sequences inside of the DNA. So there are certain proteins that many organisms will make alike, such as cytochrome C, and that similarity between organisms also links us together and gives proof to differentiation based on evolution, yet some certain qualities remain due to that existence and linkage to that common ancestor. Again, DNA relies on certain variations to give rise to different phenotypes and different species. So we're also able to trace some of the mutations and variations inside of the DNA sequences in order to more closely link organisms, see how they relate to one another, and sort of create an evolutionary tree based on it. So this kind of gives a rundown of those basic evidence that we have. So we have those radiometric evidence of typically fossils and being able to date things, being able to make a timeline showing small changes over time. We have the anatomic evidence revolving around embryology as well as similar structures, such as homologous structures and vestigial structures. And lastly, for the molecular basis, this relies on the similarity of DNA, and we're able to trace certain preserved sequences between organisms as well as trace differences or mutations. And that allows us to link and relate species and organisms more easily to one another.